My name is Kathleen Cunningham. I'm the Executive Director of the Village Preservation Society of East Hampton, and we have the privilege of partnering today with the Peconic Land Trust and Mellon and Tebbins, their Vice President, is here, is going to be presenting, and also Holly Sanford, a Senior Project Manager. Following that, we have the privilege of having Janet Fink and Arthur Platt. So without further ado, are you coming up first? Okay, I'll introduce Holly Sanford. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. My name is Holly Sanford. I'm a Senior Project Manager at the Peconic Land Trust. I'll be presenting today along with my colleague, Vice President Melanie Tebbins. And also joining us today is our colleague, Megan Cuddy, who has coordinated all the material you might like to look at in conjunction with our presentation. So today we're focusing on historic preservation. Okay. The Peconic Land Trust, for those of you who may not know too much about us, what we're going to do is in this presentation, we're breaking it down into 3 sections. The first section is the Peconic Land Trust, who we are, what we do. The second portion will be how we preserve, whether you're going to designate or actually use what they call a historic preservation easement. And the third section is going to be an example of one of the projects that we recently did. So let's start with section 1, who we are and what we do. The Peconic Land Trust was founded in 1983 by John Halsey. He had been on the West Coast, came back to his hometown, and saw a lot of the farmland and everything going, and people not being able to hold on to it. So he said, how can I help the local farmers and also protect the land? So he decided, in a grassroots effort, to make it his mission to conserve working farms, natural lands, and the heritage of the community. And it continues to be our mission. Throughout the 40-some-odd years that the organization has been around and grown, we've had about 14,000 acres preserved, conserved. We haven't done it alone. We always work with municipalities, whether it be the state, the county, or the town. And of course, we do work with willing landowners who are interested in possibly having a conservation outcome for their property. We also not only had 580 projects, but 95 nature preserves we've worked in to help preserve here on the island. The one thing we do always try to make clear to everyone is we are a nonprofit, and we do not collect the 2% transfer tax, also known as the Community Preservation Fund. Just to give a little bit more clarification on that, the Community Preservation Fund, CPF fund, as some of you may know, is in the 5 East End towns. It's a transfer tax so that any kind of real estate transaction carries with it a 2% tax. That tax goes into a pool at the town where the transaction took place, and that money is used for conservation. We don't collect it, we don't disperse it, and we certainly have no access to it except when we work in conjunction with the towns. And as I mentioned, we don't do it alone. We do it with town, county, and state and federal help. Our money, as I said, comes from donors and a little bit from grants. When we work with towns, the money comes from the Community Preservation Fund. When we work with the county, it comes from that 0.25% tax that they have. And when we work with the state, we usually work with the DEC, the New York Parks and Recreation, and also ag and markets, agricultural markets, because we do work with so many farmers. And the items that they address when we're using these funds is a number of things, and we just put a few up here so you can get an idea of it. You know, preservation of parks, natural preserves, open space, agricultural lands, establishing wildlife refuges, and also there's coastal resilience and historic places. So there's many, many things that the money goes towards, but these are a handful of where they're going at the moment. Conservation criteria. When we work with people, we don't just preserve anything. It has to fit into a certain criteria, and we have a very long list, but again, I've just put a few up here, and when we work with people, it only has to categorize one of these. in order for us to consider taking on the project. The trust itself is comprised of primarily 4 different departments. I'm in the planning department. Basically, we kick off a project. We find out where land is vulnerable or where people are interested in protecting their property, or if a farmer is interested in protecting their land, and we work with them. Once the land is either acquired by us through funding or we're monitoring it, it goes to the stewardship department. The preserves are monitored or maintained by stewardship, and the agricultural land is maintained and stewarded by the agricultural department. We also have an outreach department that does programs throughout the year. They have like kayaking, hikes. Around Christmas time, they have wreaths, anything that's going to re-engage people with the land that we've already preserved. And of course, we have to have a development department, a department that's going to fund all these efforts, and a small amount of the funding does come from grants. When we do projects, we have conservation tools, and I'm just going to touch on a few. The conservation easement, that's a legal document that the landowner agrees to enter into with a qualified entity, such as a town, state, county, or a nonprofit like us whose mission is land conservation. It's basically when you buy your property, you not only have land, but you have a bundle of rights. That's the way we look at it. And if people decide, you know, I want to relinquish some of those rights and protect the land in perpetuity and just exercise a few, they'll enter into a conservation easement. Purchase of development rights. That's essentially the same thing, except rather than just relinquishing voluntarily their rights, they're going to sell them. And they usually sell them again to the state, county, or town. A farm, the farmers are very, we use that a lot with farm protection because the farmer wants to retain their land, but they do like an infusion of cash to help the business get a little jump start. Conservation subdivision. When people do subdivisions, they're always focusing on how much residential lots, how much development can we get out of this subdivision. Well, a conservation subdivision is just the opposite. You're looking to see how much land can we protect and how little development we can do. So it's just a flip-flop, and it differs in each town. Bargain sale. That's when a landowner agrees to sell their property less than the fair market value. What happens is they'll get an appraisal, and the appraisal comes out at $1 million, but the trust doesn't have $1 million to buy that. Maybe we can generate $700,000. So we'll go to them, hey, we only have $700,000. Can you do that? They said, sure, because you know what? That extra $300,000, because we're a charitable organization, that is considered a charitable gift, and then they apply to the IRS for a potential charitable gift on that difference. And they'll consult their financial advisors to see if that works for them. Installment sale, it's just what it sounds like. Instead of getting that $1,000 all in one shot, maybe the trust will say, well, we can give you $100,000, but we're going to need time to generate it over a couple of years. Okay, so give it to us over a couple of years. That's an installment sale we sometimes use. Testamentary gift, people who've enjoyed their property for their lifetime want to see generations to come enjoy it as well, so they'll donate it through their wills. And the final one is the historic preservation easement. And that's exactly like a land conservation easement, except it's only on structures. And you can do it to restrict the entire facade or just the front of the building. You can restrict it for the footprint, all those types of things. So now we're going to go into section 2, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Melanie Tebbins, and she's going to talk about designation versus easement.
Thank you, Holly. Hello, everyone. Some of you may be familiar, as I imagine all of you are. There's a historic designation that can be deemed appropriate for different properties or houses or structures after there's a documented record identifying the authentic historic value of a home. That can be done either at a village level with the village historic district that includes different historic structures that have been designated as contributing to the historic integrity of the village. There's also state and national registers that rely on those historic records indicating that this structure is historic, and they oversee, it legally recognizes the designations that these are important historic structures that should have that another level of review for the owners who own those properties and that might want to make modifications. So those are different designations that exist. There's three or four different myths that I'd like to just highlight for a moment. Some people think that having a designation would prevent them from renovating, enlarging, recoloring, or relocating the property, the house, but that's not the case. It only requires that the proposed work goes through a review process beforehand through whatever entity holds that designation. Another myth is that you're not able to demolish a local landmark, and that's not necessarily the case. Unfortunately, we've seen in some other villages, there was a case of a historic home being demolished because a historic preservation entity at that time was not very strong. So although it was a historic building that had a designation, it didn't prevent it from unfortunately being demolished for one reason or another. And that is why we often want to encourage that people consider a third level of protection, and that's where Peconic Land Trust could come in, or the town. Another is that perhaps if you have your property designated, it's a bit elitist. You know, it requires a lot of money. That's not always the case. As you can see, these examples are structures that have had historic designation, and so it can be something as common as a landmark, like the Conscience Point in Southampton. I think there's even a tree, 300-year-old over in Orient, that's been designated as a historic landmark. So it all depends on the person behind wanting that designation. There's documentation that's required. It's a pretty rigorous process, but it's proven to be very helpful to historic districts when they are looking to protect the heritage of the area. Having these designations are important. So as Holly indicated, a conservation easement is a legal document. And as she described, I was taught it's a bundle of sticks. You have the right to build on your property. In New York City, there's air rights. Out west, there's mining and water rights. Well, a historic facade easement identifies that there's historic value in the architectural integrity of the building. So that real property interest is either donated or sold, and it's given to a qualified entity such as Peconic Land Trust or the town or village. And we then have an interest in your property. You still have all your other private property rights, but our responsibility lies in monitoring that property in perpetuity, at least on an annual basis. We ask your permission to come and do our site visits. Our stewardship staff come and make sure that the terms of the easement are being abided by so that they're not violated. So in the case of a historic facade easement, if there's important architectural features that have been identified in the easement itself, we make sure that the owner understands they need to get our permission in addition to maybe a village historic district or preservation designation. They need to come to Peconic Land Trust and notify us of whatever renovation they are doing so that we can make sure it complies with the terms of the easement. When you do gift a conservation easement, it's recorded at the county center on your land, and you can then seek a charitable gift with the IRS. So this is how it works. It does restrict, in the case of this topic today, we're talking about historic facade easements on a house, but the real property boundary needs to be described as well. So the easement is conveyed on the entire property and then have more focus on the house itself. But in some cases, we work with the landowner, and if it's a large property, they might say that they want the rest of the acreage protected as well. They might say that they want to have the ability in the future that a pool or tennis court could be located over here, but not that it would interfere with the historic character of the house. So you can get as specific or as general as you want, because this is going to be the terms of the easement in perpetuity for owners beyond yourself. So we go over this customized document, and we restrict sometimes the land in addition to the house, and yet it is still owned privately, and the easement shows up in title searches whenever you're going to go sell the house. So title companies reveal to the next buyer there's this important conservation easement recorded on the land, and these are the restrictions. So you have agricultural easements protecting the prime ag soils, and the town, through the CPF fund, has sometimes purchased the development rights from a property so that a farmer can continue to farm and afford to buy the land. Because easements that restrict development represent anywhere from 75 to 90% of the value of the land out here. So if you have $1 million property and you sell the development rights, it could be maybe worth only 10% of what's remaining. So that makes it more affordable for farmers to buy protected farmland. Open space easements protect woodlands or shorelines. We have to document, though, the important conservation values of the property. Natural habitat, scenic viewshed for the public. There has to be some demonstrated public benefit. So we refer to local legislation stating that the towns want to preserve the character, the prime soils, the historic viewsheds. So we list all the reasons why this is an important preservation easement, and then the IRS says, oh, okay, there's a public benefit. So you're not just protecting your backyard. They wouldn't give you a charitable gift if you're just protecting your backyard. They want to know there's a public benefit to this easement. And lastly, it can be used in combination with some limited development. So we're not a preservation organization, we're a conservation organization, and we really work with allowing the land to talk to us. What features should be protected? What areas could be developed? And then what is the middle ground? And when we're working with landowners, there's oftentimes multiple owners, multiple generations. So it's really quite challenging at times, very validating work and gratifying, but boy, you have to have a psychology degree too, because you've got to try and find a win-win solution for all the different people involved. So the advantages of a conservation easement are that you're protecting the property while you retain private ownership, you're leaving a legacy, you help with estate planning because now the property might not be worth $10 million. You've reduced the value down, so your heirs are paying a lower estate tax. And then there's potential tax savings. I'll get into the tax savings later. Retaining the architectural integrity as well as the local character and heritage of a building comes in a few different ways. There's sometimes just the facade. If you are looking for a charitable gift from the IRS for doing a historic facade easement, they require that you protect all four sides of the house. It cannot just be the front. But some people say, no, it's more important. I don't want the charitable gift. I want to provide for the house to have a life beyond me if it's a small structure, and you can build out the back. I really just care about one or two sides of the house. So that's fine, but you just wouldn't meet the IRS criteria. And there's also the scenic public viewshed of those houses. We have a house, I think it's the Twin Sisters house in Sag Harbor that Deborah Light donated to us, and we went through a very challenging time the last 5 years where a new buyer bought it, started tearing out the windows, let the hedge grow up, and we had to litigate that. And we finally got them to understand the importance that the easement was restricting the historic integrity of the house, and they couldn't take it anymore. After years of us litigating them, they sold it. The new buyer came along and the attorney said, before we go into this this contract, we want to make sure it's all cleared up. What do you need them to do? So we finally had the ability to legally hold them responsible for returning the house back to the original windows and and getting the hedge back down so there was a public view shed. So we're very happy that's a success story. But that's why when we receive conservation easements, we do ask for a stewardship contribution, because our stewardship staff does have a responsibility in perpetuity to uphold the terms of the easement. And we are in several different litigations right now over making sure the terms of the easement are upheld. The valuation of the conservation easement depends upon what a qualified appraiser says it is worth. Peconic Land Trust doesn't give financial advice. Everyone's financial situation is unique. You need your financial advisors to help you determine what kind of a charitable gift you might be able to ask for from the IRS. So when Peconic Land Trust is working with the landowner, we require you get an appraisal, because that has to be submitted to the IRS to document the valuation of your property before and after the terms of the conservation easement were conveyed. The appraisal fee could be a few $1,000s or a percentage of the valuation, and it must be including a variety of different pieces of information. We have a guide to help landowners understand. It's not just a real estate listing statement. It's a much more detailed report based on comparable sales. So we have people come to us for typically 3 different tax reasons. Some have a very high income, and they're looking to offset their income tax. So just as you might donate artwork or clothing or some real property, if you donate it to a qualified organization such as ourselves, you can get the charitable gift if you meet all the IRS criteria. So there's income tax incentives. There's also property tax incentives. In some cases, we meet with the tax assessor. We explain that you have a 10-acre property. Your taxes are continuing to increase. You want to just retain the property with one house that you have on there, and you're almost being penalized for just keeping it as is. If you were to donate a conservation easement and protect the property from any future development, the assessors usually work with the landowner and recognize now preserved land is not nearly as valuable as land that could be developed. So property taxes can, as a result, be reduced if you do a conservation easement protecting the land. And there's also estate tax reasons. As I mentioned before, if you are doing your estate planning and thinking about the next generation, perhaps one is farming, perhaps one wants to own the home and the large property and keep it in the family. If you're able to reduce the value of the estate, a conservation easement might be a tool that works for you. The towns typically don't go purchase development rights from a private property. For those reasons, it's usually for the towns might buy development rights for preserving farmland or important wetlands or woodlands, but the public benefit has to be there. That's why this tool works for people who might be doing more private estate planning, and they could donate it to Peconic Land Trust. And lastly, there's another one I don't think that's mentioned here, is your capital gains tax. I know someone who said to me in Bridgehampton, I bought this property that was worth $5,000 an acre when I bought it. It's now worth $500,000 an acre, and I'm going to be hit with a huge capital gains tax. So they worked with us to preserve as much land as they could afford so that they did not incur as high of a capital gains tax. So this is how it would work if you were to gift a historic easement to Peconic Land Trust. I know the town of East Hampton has accepted historic facade easements on a couple of buildings. It has to restrict the footprint and or elevation. It has to place on the surrounding view shed. As I had mentioned, there has to be a public benefit to the historic character of that house and why it's important. So if it's in a village historic district or if it's designated, all of those substantiations are important for us to list in the easement. We're not just protecting a random house. There has to be documented historic value to that structure. The easement can be 30 pages long. There's a lot of template legal language in it, but the first few pages list all the reasons why this historic structure should be preserved. Gifting property to us through a testamentary gift would mean that you might put in your will that you want to gift the house, if it's, and we're keeping a focus here on historic structures. Peconic Land Trust has generously received different houses that we use either for staff housing or at our farms program on the North Fork. Or if you want to just gift it as an asset property, maybe there's no particular historic value to the property, you don't have heirs, and you could put in your will that you want to donate property to Peconic Land Trust, and then we're able to sell it and receive the money and put that back into our mission and our work. If it's a nature preserve, that's also a very important reason to protect. We're running out of meadows here. You know, successional growth is we don't have as many meadows. That's why actually the airport property is so important, that there's meadows around the airport for the different wildlife that need meadowland and not just the woodland. And so here's section 3. I'm going to hand it back over to Holly, and she'll close with a great example of what she worked on recently.
Okay, so I think it's always beneficial when you see a project and the various steps and how it might apply to whatever you're considering. So this is a little American cottage. It's located on the North Fork, right on Peconic Bay. It was built in 1902. It was used as a clubhouse initially. It was a community-type house, and it was called the Sagayan Club. There's the location of it right there on Peconic Bay. Now, the current owner came to us, and she was very enthusiastic. She knew the people who lived there previously. She's a real historic enthusiast, and she wanted to restore and renovate the little cottage and then put an easement on it. And as you can see, the cottage was, as I said, built in 1902, and it was part of the Sagayan Club. That was the indigenous name of the last inhabitant on that road. And then it was subsequently owned by Edith and Henry Prelwitz, and they were both members of the Peconic Bay School of Painting, and that's an example of their painting there in the lower right. They're really well renowned. They have paintings in New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. And the subsequent owners to that, the Fosters, Adams, they had 2 children. So in addition to the cottage, they put 2 little wings on for their children. So the current owner loved the historic aspect of not only the cottage, the architectural nature of the turn of the century, but she also loved the historic significance of the people who inhabited it. So we thought, those are some good reasons to work with this person. So what she did was she did do, as you can see, the exterior was restored, and she kind of had everything replaced and drainage, and there was actually a glass walkway that she put joining the structures. This was solid before, but this is the original. And these are the 2 wings that those 2 children had, and this was solid, but it's glass now, and it's really quite beautiful. And I know that I understand that they're actually kind of leaning towards a separation of real historic structures and then joining them with more contemporaries, just to show the difference between the structures, and highlighting the importance of the original. And here's just a few more pictures. She did put in a basement, which was very good. She had, as I said, drainage around the edges there of the stones. This is an old fountain that she kept and retained. And it's really very beautiful because she kept the historic nature of the architecture as well as perpetuating the history of the inhabitants. It's referred to as the Low House because there was a major primary house, a parcel over. It was called the High House, and that actually had been floated down Peconic Bay and then reassembled, and then this Low House was a little cottage that they used afterwards for people and summer homes and things like that. So in addition, as my colleague Melanie said, that sometimes when you put a historic easement on a house, you not only put it on the house, but you'd like to protect the surrounding area as well for view shed. So this was the case with this particular house. It's right on the water there. So in order to protect the scenic view from the house to the water, and also from the water to the house, we put a restriction that nothing can be higher than 4 feet, shrubs and all that. And the owner also didn't want any more structures on the land. She wanted the land just kept as is. And you can see it's very beautiful, the little steps going down, and then the house, and then Peconic Bay at night. She also wanted to make sure that not only it could be a residence, but it could be possibly an artist retreat. So when we did the easement, we had to make sure that the language allowed for that use in the future. Because although we were restricting it in many other ways, we wanted to make sure that we abided by her wishes to make it a few more options rather than just a residency. Okay, so if you work with the Peconic Land Trust and you have a project, there are several steps, and I'm just going to hit the high notes here. You know, you have the easement, which is the legal document that we would work on, and it would designate what's the prohibited uses and the permitted uses. We have what they call a historic architectural report. We have an architect that comes and assesses the architectural value and the components and kind of makes it period accurate and designates those as important components to protect in perpetuity. And in this particular case, because the owner was so enthusiastic about the resident history, the architect allowed her to put like a addendum to the report with all the history of the prior inhabitants. And it was very nice. It was a very nice combination. We also have to, if we take on a project and we are going to now take this property in perpetuity or the easement, we have to have permission from our board. So we have to have a board resolution. And then at the end of all of this, in order to monitor the property in perpetuity, we have something called the baseline, where we go out and we target the photographs and all the important components of the historic easement that needs to be maintained. So let's just take a quick look here. The easement, basically we open the easement by saying why it's worthy of being protected. Because first of all, we have to say who's the grantor? That's the landowner. We're the grantee, the Peconic Land Trust. We're going to be monitoring and maintaining the property and making sure that all the prohibited and permitted uses are adhered to. There's a recital portion, like every kind of legal document, saying what the mission is and the justification for this document. The agreement, we promise to oversee this, and the landowner promises to abide by the document. And then the purposes in this particular case would be historic preservation and conservation. The easement itself always says what type it is. As my colleague was saying, there's agricultural and there's open space. But in this case, it would be historic preservation easement. And then we talk about what's permitted and what's not. And then we go on to say the obligations of the grantor. And then, like, the owner would still have to pay their taxes. They would still have to have insurance. All those things that you would associate with ownership. And the grantee, that's us, the Peconic Land Trust, we would have to maintain our part of the bargain, which is a yearly inspection and make sure that everything is being kept as the document has laid forth. I don't know, maybe the battery's going? Oh no, is this it? Okay, we're okay. Are we okay? Wait a minute, sorry. Okay, sorry. All right, so, and this is just, so this is the, the deed of conservation easement, and that gets recorded in perpetuity. Everybody signs off on it. It gets recorded at the county, and along with the document itself is a minimized survey, reduced so that it's just the essentials there. I mean, there's the house, and there's the two little wings, and here's the walk that the owner wanted to keep protected. And this owner had an affiliate. She loved this tree. It's an old growth tree. And she doesn't want it touched unless, of course, it becomes diseased and there's a legitimate reason for removing it. So that was also included in the easement, that not only the house had to be protected and this wall and but that tree also. So you can see how it can be very customized to whatever an owner is looking to do. Come on, a little heavy-handed. Okay, and here's the architectural report. This gentleman did some drawings to, I have two architects right here, and I'm renderings, okay, and just to you know, flesh out the important components of the architecture. And then there's a overview of it as well. So that's very nice. It's about 10 pages, maybe 15 pages. It's the importance of the historic value of the house architecturally, and in this case, the historic residence as well. Here's the resolution, because when we do accept the document, we have to, this responsibility, we do have to have permission from our board. So we state all the reasons, all the good reasons why we should take this on, and then of course the board says yes or no. And of course this was a really nice project, so it was a resounding yes. And as I mentioned, the baseline documentation is the final document that is used to monitor the property in perpetuity. And our stewardship department goes out and takes all these photo points and categorizes them into one document and lists them, and they have to be monitored each year from every perspective to make sure nothing changes. And we get a copy, the owner gets a copy, and that way it's maintained as the way it should be. So I think that concludes the presentation, I believe. There we go. So if you do have any questions, Melanie and I are here to answer them.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Kathy, for welcoming us. And thanks so much to the Village Preservation Society for inviting us to speak today. And Peconic, great presentation. We definitely learned a lot. So I'm Janet Fink.
And I'm Arthur Platt.
And our firm, Fink & Platt Architects, is located in New York. And we do some work out here and also in the city, restoring, expanding, and furnishing historic buildings and spaces for homeowners here, Watermill, Sag Harbor, etc. So today we'd like to share a house that we restored and expanded for homeowners here in the village. It's known as Wayside, and it did receive the Village Preservation Award last fall.
So this photograph is an 1982 photograph of the Dr. George Monroe House on Ocean Avenue. It's in the Ocean Avenue Historic District. So this photograph is about 100 years after it was built. In this photograph, you can see the building was designed by Isaac Green, an architect from Sayville, Long Island, who did quite a bit of work out here in the East End, including the first two Maidstone clubhouses that preceded the current one. Some of the distinct features of Isaac Green's designs are this gambrel roof. So you see a pitch here, another pitch here, and then it resolves in this bell cast curve shape, which is a reference to sort of a Dutch colonial type. There's also another characteristic of Isaac Green's work is a deep inset porch underneath the gambrel roof. What was fascinating to us is that these early shingle-style houses in the historic district, in the summer colony, which became the historic district, is that the first floor is a much smaller footprint than the second floor. You see bedrooms up here and dormers entirely within the structure of the roof that expand over the porch shape. There's also arts and craft detailing in the columns, which have this flared top, sometimes called an eared column. Multi-pane windows, 15 over 15.
That's good. So this house is in the Ocean Avenue Historic District. Ocean Avenue is one of 4 historic districts in the village. There's the Main Street Historic District, the Hook and Hunting Lane. So most of the houses in the Ocean Avenue Historic District were built in the 1880s to the early 1900s. Not all of them, of course, to your question, were built during that time period, but all of the houses that contribute to the character of the Ocean Avenue Historic District are more or less in that time period, which corresponds roughly with the beginning of the summer colony.
And luckily, since the 1880s, many of those houses were valued such that they weren't torn down in the intervening decades. Some were, and some newer houses in the 1930s, 40s, 50s were built, and possibly in the historic report, to answer your question, those would not be identified as contributing buildings. So it would be very unlikely that someone would seek a historic easement for the facade of those later properties. This photograph occurs on the front of the guidelines booklet for the Ocean Avenue Historic District. And when you read that booklet, it's fascinating to learn that the architectural features of the buildings are noted and described and what is worthy of being preserved, but also the ambiance of the whole neighborhood, the distance of the house from the street. Formerly, there were much fewer of these tall privet hedges. People had split rail fences. You could see across the lawns to these new houses. With deer and other issues and privacy, these privet hedges have grown up. So this is very much about the character of the district, not only the architecture. These four buildings here are in historic districts in East Hampton. The two on your left over there are also by Isaac Green. And again, you see a recessed porch in those two and a dominant roof structure that encompasses the occupiable second floor. So it gives the house a more discrete character. Buildings built about 10 years after, maybe in the 1890s, early 1900s, you see a full second floor, the roof happening above the second floor, and often the porch is added to the building as a separate element, not embedded into the building.
Or appears to be added.
Yeah, appears to. Well, not added after the fact, but it's outside the volume of the building.
Yeah. So when we work with historic buildings, we spend some time researching them, spending some time measuring them, looking at their character, their qualities, their detail, and we try to use that as a way to inspire our work. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Here are some pre-restoration photographs of the house, going around the back of the house. And this is the site plan. So on Ocean Avenue, hard to see, but can you point to it? That'd be great.
This is the tone. This is the historic volume here, which really should have a tone on it. Disappeared.
Yeah, exactly. And then the teeing off to the back is the addition. As Arthur mentioned, one of the guidelines of the Ocean Avenue Historic District is that additions to houses do not overwhelm the historic house. So they're typically recommended to be behind the historic house and not engulf it, which is the strategy that we adopted. You can go to the next one. So in this diagram, three-dimensional diagram, we're showing the historic house at the upper left, and at the lower right, our proposed addition. It's described here as a pull-apart diagram, so you could imagine it being nested together and fitting into the old house along this slight red line, which we call the jigsaw puzzle joint, because with the way the addition it nests with the historic structure isn't a clean line. It actually joins in different ways in different places, and we'll show you that in a moment.
There was a later addition, a 1907 addition here that we removed, and then this slid into that position.
Okay, next. Okay, great. So while it had been fairly well maintained by previous owners, upon closer inspection, the house required a full restoration. Initially, we had been asked by our wonderful clients, homeowners, to merely do an addition. But as we started to look more closely, the beautiful historic house required some restoration work. including this iconic east-facing porch. This is the facade facing Ocean Avenue, which you can see as you walk by. It's actually quite open to the sidewalk. This beautiful east porch was restored completely, including its distinctive eared columns.
Here are some more detailed photographs of the post-restoration porch, where you see some of these arts and craft details supporting the projecting second floor along here, the eared columns. Upon closer probes and examination, we found that some of the decking structure had rotted, and also some of the porch post foundations that also were undersized, and some of the posts had to be replaced. So we jacked up the porch and did a thorough restoration of the decking, a new construction of the decking, and restored and replaced some of the column posts. In order to clarify the goals of the restoration, we made these hand sketches, hand drawings after we surveyed the important historic dimensions and features of the porch to allow for the restoration of some of these ears to the columns. Also, we noticed that generations of homeowners, when getting ready for the season, have their landscapers pile up a lot of mulch and soaker hoses right next to historic woodwork or any kind of woodwork. It's not a great idea. So we did slightly lower the grade at the face of the building and created a little more of a space underneath the deck for ventilation. That was very important for the longevity of this historic porch. Another surprise when we got to know this house was that on this wonderful porch, there's this rustic chimney base, which is a little bit of an unexpected feature. It's comprised of both flagstone and corbelled brick that segue one into the other and continue all the way up to the chimney top. Some of the stone was cracked, and we worked with a masonry conservation specialist to create a recipe for correct mortar to replace and repoint quite a bit of the mortar in this feature.
And surprisingly, the shingles underneath the porch are original from 1888, original cypress shingles. They were protected by that deep overhang on the porch and just required minimal replacement. It's selective repair.
Here we are up at the top of the chimney, where there was repointing work on the masonry and some patching of this interesting cementitious cap, kind of a quiet detail on top of the chimney, not a terracotta chimney pipe or anything. And we added this copper squirrel cage on top.
Okay, great. So coming around to the south side of the house, you can see the gambrel, the classic gambrel profile of the roof. The beautiful 15 over 15 historic windows were painstakingly restored by a craftsman over the period of several months. We chose with the homeowners not to replace the windows and to simply do alternating storms and screens replaced seasonally in order to protect this beautiful original historic fabric. So here, coming around a little bit more to the south side of the house, you can see that the addition is peeking out to the left. It's not very visible from the sidewalk, and it has a very quiet appearance and character. So this is the south facade, the addition proper. On this side of the building, the joint between new and old is immediately to the left of that tall arched window, which is in the original stair hall. The windows on the addition and trim of the windows on the addition are handled in a different way from that of the house. So where the house windows, the historic house windows, are divided light and painted and trim is painted white, at the addition, the windows are not divided light. They're, of course, double glazed, and the trim is unpainted, natural mahogany. Just to make a distinction between new and old, of course, the building is shingled, so there is a kind of continuity of surface. that we wanted to maintain. We really feel like this promotes a conversation between new and old rather than new imitating old or being radically different from old.
Here you've come around 180 degrees and you're deep within the property looking at the west addition, which has the same ridge line as the Ocean Avenue original building. And you see it also has a porch that's carved into the volume of the building. Within, as you enter into this porch, you see that the details are handled differently than the painted, finished. They're a little more modern, straight columns, unfinished cedar as you look up to the ceiling.
Allowing the bedrooms to extend out over the porch, similarly to the original house.
As you come around to the north side, underneath the porch, you arrive at this tall gable structure, which has an infill lattice feature, and this is much deeper within the more private part of the property.
Compositionally, that new element answers the beautiful sun porch of Dr. Monroe's consultation office. So this beautiful little structure with its beautiful diamond windows was painstakingly restored by craftsmen, again, over several months.
This drawing, early design development drawing, shows how we purposely wanted to create this new gable porch to somewhat counterbalance the historic sun porch on that, both in their gables, in their gambreled elevation.
So the sun porch itself was strengthened, restored, stabilized, but not squared up too much because we didn't want to damage the beautiful diamond light windows. And here's the craftsman, oops, let me go back one. Here's the craftsman restoring the diamond windows.
And you can see those eared columns resolve at the corner there, infilled with the glass.
To the right of the sun porch, we also enclosed a room, a covered porch, where there's a bedroom above, original to the house, we believe, and we enclosed this open porch with screens, mahogany framed screens. Go to the next.
This was an interesting part of the project for us because it's a part of the project where you have the presence of historic fabric, the classic eared columns, and new material. So that's looking back at the new addition, and this is looking through the porch to the historic house. And the insect screens slide behind the historic columns. So it's a place where both periods of the house's life meet. There's an interior view of it, and you see the support structure for the screens sliding behind the white columns, kind of like a little bit like at the sun porch.
So at the interior of the house, we adopted a similar conservation approach, sort of trying to retain as much original material as possible and adapting our modern sensibility with the new elements in the design.
So this is a view of two of the public rooms, you could call them, facing Ocean Avenue. When we arrived on the project, these had been opened up into one large space, which lost the proportion of the secondary detailing. So we did rebuild this wall here with what was a similar opening to divide the dining room from the parlor, and did a thorough restoration of the plasterwork with a polished surface on top and rustic or a more rough surface on the walls.
All of the woodwork in the original part of the house was restored, not replaced. We worked with an amazing interior designer who our clients had worked with before, Deborah Oppenheimer, who created the beautiful color palette. And wherever possible, we tried to conserve historic materials. This is Arthur by hand touching up some of the glazing on the original brick and mortar.
It wasn't enough for an arts and craft architect back in the 1880s to do a brick fireplace surround and then show the mortar. The mortar got painted to give it a much more uniform color. So we were repainting that mortar there. There you see the pigmented mortar giving a quieter look to the brickwork.
And these are the beautiful interiors by Deborah
Restored-
Oppenheimer.
Restored upstairs bedroom.
Sorry. Just gets to this part of the presentation and it won't advance.
Oh, wanted you.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Oops. Let's go back one. Oops. Let's go back one. Okay. And this is one of the rooms, one of the large new bedrooms in the addition, which also has a window seat in it.
This is on your left-hand side, bedroom view into a bathroom with a simple washstand, no tile on the wall, more of a summer house character. And this is a sort of enlarged bathroom within the historic house where we repurpose sink basins on new washstand legs.
And then this is one of the large bathrooms in the addition. Beautiful bathing vessel, lovely place to have a tub at the end of the day. And it's above the north porch. Looking out towards, you may have noticed before when we talked about the north porch, this small structure, which was a playhouse or storage building perhaps, on the property, original to the house. We built a new basement for this building about 20 feet to the north, and to house pool equipment, of course. So the pool equipment isn't sitting out on the lawn. And the contractor actually moved it by hand. Wonderful contractors, John Hummel, Custom Builders, did the addition and restoration. And
Very much part of the conservation approach.
yeah, exactly. Oops. Okay. Here we
Eventually
go.
it got on the foundation.
All right. Okay. It's great. All right.
Thank you.
And yeah, there we go. And so here's the little pool house at twilight.
There's the west-facing addition, which very much evokes the volume and the roof profile of the historic, also at twilight.
Yeah, we feel that the addition respects the historic house's relationship to the street, kind of preserves that autonomy. It evokes its relationship to landscape. It sits on the land in a similar way, and it's humble yet high quality details. In our practice, we embrace restoration and renovation as part of the foundation of a sustainable approach. And we always try to use materials that are authentic, durable, and timeless. Thank you so much for allowing us to make this presentation. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
We also just want to give a huge shout out to the Village Preservation
Yes, and all
for
the
their
great work you
programming
do.
and their advocacy. It takes a
Anybody
lot
have
of
any
planning.
questions for these
Questions? Any?
We had a fantastic experience. We worked with Robert Hefner originally. We met with him very early on in the design process. We brought a physical model. We had built several physical models of this project. We brought one of our early physical models to a meeting with him just to talk about our ideas, to get his feedback. He was very collaborative, and that was a preliminary meeting before we went to the review board. We did not feel, or at that time, it was suggested that he should review the project in advance, sort of casually, and make specific recommendations. He generally thought what we were doing made a lot of sense. He was very disappointed that we removed a small piece of the old building at the back, the service wing, but he understood why it had to happen in order to build a proper basement, et cetera. So, and then design review board, we sailed through, which was lovely. Doing your homework ahead of time really helps. Absolutely, absolutely. Great question.
Go ahead.
That's the right word. Well, have to talk later about that. Yeah, I don't know.
During your presentation, when you were talking about the low house, you brought up an interesting point. Many homeowners, perhaps their consultants, their contractors, may be afraid of architectural reviews or landmarks
You should talk to the mic.
hearings.
Speak into the mic.
Is this on? Okay.
It's a recording. It's
I think
recording.
I'm loud.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
to be
recording,
recorded. But basically, and because of that sort of fear factor, they may say, okay, we're just going to take the details of the original house and copy them in hardyboard or whatever to get that approval because we don't want to be slowed down. But these reviewing boards, they don't always like the homeowner to early it up, to do like an ersatz imitation behind. That still may get approved. They like to see that the architects who are of their period are responding to the historic architecture and carrying on in a developing the language of it, maybe. So there's nuance to it, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, when I was working with this one project where the original cottage with the two separate, and then there was a glass hallway in between, it was kind of reminiscent. Isn't the Sag Harbor Library done like that?
Yes, yeah, it's a newer extension,
I
yeah.
mean, the
It's,
extension
yeah.
was glass.
Yeah.
yes.
So, I mean, when I saw that happen again, I'm like, oh, okay, so this is kind of a new perception of, maintaining the original when, joining it to the contemporary.
It amplifies the historic power of the original and then subdues the addition or pushes it back. Yeah.
Great questions. Thank you. Oh, here's another one.
Thanks, that was great, and I love that building and never did history walking by it. What's the history of the architect and his rationale and design intent to have the porches in the heart of the ground floor? Was that anything he's ever written about or
You know,
any information?
he might have been so busy that he didn't like Louis Sullivan, like write down his ideas during a slow period.
He was very prolific in the village.
Yeah, I mean, basically, when you come, the two houses to the right, start at the beginning of Ocean Ave, there's a house called Pudding Hill. That was the first house he did, and Mr. Herrick, who had that house built in 1886, was one of the founding members of the Maidstone. So was Dr. Monroe. So were many of the people in the summer colony. So they might have all wanted to work with Isaac Green, who was also doing the clubhouse. And if you've ever seen pictures of that 1890s clubhouse, it kind of looks like Wayside, but it's 300 feet long with multiple dormers.
I think he was trying to make the building a little bit diminutive and a little sort of Marie Antoinette Petit Hameau. Like there's definitely something subdued and quiet and non-ostentatious. And in fact, in Hefner's book, which we have out there, East Hampton's Heritage, they talk about that, how it's very unpretentious and it's modest. Yes, interesting.
Yeah, well,
I wonder if he was a Quaker.
He was from Sayville, so that's, I'm going to say, halfway back toward Brooklyn. Brooklyn had Dutch people in it for a long time. The English people out here were kind of threatening them. But so maybe he was closer to Dutch models he would have seen in Nassau County with that bell-cast roof which
It's possible.
and there was an interest in reviving. People were starting to see how organic some of the historic architecture was and reviving.
His father also owned a sawmill, or lumber yard, right? He was the Riverhead Building Supply of the time, right? So I mean, he was very close to craftsmanship and hand work.
But if you Google him, you'll see. You can then go to Sayville and see some beautiful churches he designed and other
In
buildings.
stone.
In stone and wood.
Yeah.
I don't know what precedence he was.
I think
looking
someone's
at.
writing a PhD dissertation on him.
There it's coming. Something's coming.
Anyway, thank you.
Anybody else?
All right,
Well, I
thank
just
you.
want to thank you
Thank
so much. Thank Janet and Arthur and also Holly and Melanie and Megan for making the trip over here. We're indebted to organizations like the Peconic Land Trust and to architects like Fink and Platt to helping us to preserve this community and keep it recognizable to our, not just our memory, but for our children and for the future of this community. Their threats just continue with development, proceeding apace. So I personally am grateful, our organization is grateful, and we tip our hats to you and continue your good work. And thanks to Janet and Arthur for making it architecturally feasible.